In a quiet village, cradled by mist-covered hills, where the air carried the scent of pine and the distant chime of a temple bell, lived a young man named Tashi. Each morning, as the first light brushed the rooftops, Tashi would sit on the stone steps of his modest home, gazing at the horizon. There was a restlessness in his eyes, a quiet ache for something more than the rhythm of village life, chopping wood, tending crops, and sharing simple meals under a thatched roof. At 25, Tashi was neither rich nor poor, but he felt an emptiness he couldn't name. It wasn't hunger for food or coin, it was a deeper longing like a song half remembered. Tashi lived with his aging father, Kelsang, a man of few words but endless kindness. Their home was small, its walls weathered by years of rain and sun, yet warmed by the love they shared. Kelsang would often sit by the fire at night, carving wooden figures of birds and deer, his hands steady despite their wrinkles. Tashi admired his father's contentment, the way he found joy in the curve of a carved wing or the laughter of a neighbor's child. But Tashi couldn't feel that same peace. He wondered if life was meant to be more than this, more than the village, more than the familiar paths he'd walked since childhood. One evening, as the sky burned orange and the crickets began their chorus, Tashi sat with his father on the porch. The air was cool and the scent of roasted barley tea lingered between them. Tashi traced the rim of his cup with his finger, his thoughts heavy. "Father," he said softly, "do you ever feel like something's missing? Like there's a piece of you out there waiting to be found?" Kelsang paused, his carving knife still against the wood. He looked at Tashi, his eyes gentle but searching. "Son," he replied, "sometimes what we seek is already here. We just haven't learned to see it." Tashi nodded, but the words felt like a riddle he wasn't ready to solve. The next morning, Tashi heard whispers in the village square. A monk, old and frail, had arrived from a distant monastery. They called him Lama Norbu, a man said to carry wisdom in his silence and kindness in his weathered hands. Curious, Tashi wandered to the edge of the village, where a crowd had gathered near a gnarled oak. There sat the monk, cross-legged on a woven mat, his robes faded to the color of earth. In his hands was an empty wooden bowl, its edges worn smooth by time. Tashi watched as villagers approached, offering rice, fruit, or coins, yet Lama Norbu accepted nothing. He simply smiled, his eyes crinkling like the folds of a well-loved book. Tashi felt drawn to the monk's quiet presence, like a moth to a lantern. He returned the next day, sitting at a distance, observing. The monk noticed him and with a slight nod, gestured for Tashi to come closer. Heart pounding, Tashi knelt before him. "Why do you carry an empty bowl?" Tashi asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Lama Norbu's smile deepened. "This bowl holds everything I need," he said. "It is empty, yet it is enough." Tashi frowned, confused. How could an empty bowl be enough? But the monk's words lingered, like a seed planted in soft earth. Days passed, and Tashi found himself returning to the oak tree, each visit stirring something within him. He began to notice the small things, the way the monk's fingers traced the bowl's grain, the way his breath seemed to dance with the breeze. Yet Tashi's restlessness grew. He wanted to understand the monk's secret, to fill the hollow space inside himself. One afternoon, as the sun dipped low, Tashi spoke again. "Lama, I feel lost," he admitted, his voice trembling. "I want to be content, like you, but I don't know how." The monk looked at him, his gaze steady. "Tashi," he said, "to find what is enough, you must first let go of what is too much." That night, Tashi lay awake, the monk's words echoing in his mind. What was he holding on to? His dreams of leaving the village? His fear of never being more? He thought of his father, of the wooden birds lining their shelves, each one carved with love. Perhaps there was a lesson there, but Tashi couldn't yet grasp it. He felt a spark of determination, a need to seek answers beyond the village's borders. The monk had spoken of letting go, but Tashi wasn't ready to release his longing. Instead, he decided to act. He would find a way to prove himself, to fill the emptiness he carried like a shadow. The journey began with a single step, as all journeys do. Tashi packed a small bag, some bread, a water flask, and a shawl for the cold, and set out toward the city at the foot of the mountains. He'd heard tales of a great market there, where traders sold treasures from distant lands. Perhaps, he thought, he could find something to bring back, something to make his father proud, to show the village he was more than a dreamer. The path was rugged, winding through forests where the air smelled of moss and mystery. Tashi's heart raced with possibility, but also with doubt. What if he failed? What if the city held nothing for him? Halfway through his journey, a storm rolled in, sudden and fierce. Rain lashed the earth, turning the path to mud. Tashi sought shelter beneath a rocky overhang, his clothes soaked and his spirits dampened. As he sat shivering, he overheard two travelers nearby, their voices rising above the wind. "The city's no place for dreamers," one said. "It chews up those who come with nothing." The other laughed. You need coin or cunning to survive there." Tashi's stomach tightened. He had neither. His bag held only bread, now soggy, and his heart held only hope, now wavering. When the rain eased, Tashi pressed on, but the traveler's words clung to him. The city loomed ahead, its walls gray against the clearing sky. At the market, Tashi wandered among stalls overflowing with silk, spices, and glittering jewels. The air buzzed with shouts and laughter, but Tashi felt out of place, a sparrow among peacocks. He approached the merchant selling intricately carved boxes. "How much for this one?" Tashi asked, pointing to a small box etched with stars. The merchant eyed him, noting his worn clothes. "More than you can afford," he said with a smirk. Tashi's cheeks burned. He turned away, the weight of his emptiness heavier than ever. That night, Tashi slept in an alley, the city's clamor keeping him awake. He thought of home, of his father's steady hands, of Lama Norbu's empty bowl. "What am I doing here?" he whispered to the stars. The city had promised answers, but all it offered was noise. He felt small, insignificant, like a leaf swept away by a river. The next morning he tried again, bartering his shawl for a small jade pendant, hoping to bring it back as a gift. But as he clutched the pendant, he realized it felt hollow, like a prize won for the wrong reasons. The journey home was harder than the one to the city. Tashi's steps were heavy, his heart heavier. When he reached the village, he found his father waiting on the porch, a wooden bird in his hands. "You're back," Kelsang said, his voice warm but tinged with worry. "I thought I'd find something," Tashi admitted, his voice breaking. "But I only found failure." Kelsang placed a hand on his shoulder. "Sometimes, son, the finding comes later." Tashi wanted to believe him, but the emptiness inside him felt like a wound that wouldn't heal. Weeks later, Tashi sat by the oak tree, watching Lama Norbu. The monk was frailer now, his breath shallow, yet his smile remained. Tashi felt a pang of guilt for his absence, for chasing dreams that led nowhere. One morning as the village woke, a cry rang out. Lama Norbu had fallen ill. The villagers gathered, whispering of a rare herb that grew high in the mountains, said to cure even the gravest ailments. But the path was treacherous, and no one dared go. Tashi listened, his heart pounding. This was his chance, not to prove himself to the village, but to honor the monk who'd given him a glimpse of something deeper. He volunteered, ignoring the villagers' doubts. The climb was brutal, the air thin and the rocks sharp. Tashi's hands bled, his legs ached, but he thought of the monk's words, "Let go of what is too much." He let go of his pride, his need for approval, focusing only on the herb. At the peak, he found it, a small, vibrant plant glowing against the stone. But as he reached for it, a gust of wind tore through, and the herb slipped from his grasp, tumbling into a crevice below. Tashi froze, despair crashing over him. He'd failed again. He sank to his knees, the mountain silence swallowing his sobs. "Why?" he whispered. "Why is it never enough?" But then he remembered the monk's bowl, empty, yet enough. Perhaps the herb wasn't the answer. Perhaps the effort, the willingness to climb, was its own kind of fullness. Tashi stood, wiping his tears. He would return empty-handed, but not empty-hearted. When he reached the village, he found Lama Norbu sitting up, sipping tea, his eyes bright. The monk had recovered, not by herbs, but by rest and care. Tashi knelt before him, ashamed. "I tried," he said, voice shaking, "but I lost the herb." Lama Norbu took his hand, his grip surprisingly strong. "Tashi," he said, "you carried the mountain in your heart. That is enough." Tashi's throat tightened. For the first time, he felt the emptiness inside him soften, like ice melting under a warm sun. Months later, Tashi stood at the village festival, a wooden bird in his hands, carved with his father's tools. The crowd buzzed with laughter, but Tashi's eyes were on the horizon, where the hills met the sky. He no longer sought to fill himself with treasures or triumphs. He'd learned to carry his own empty bowl, to find beauty in what was enough. At the festival's end, a child approached, holding a wilted flower. "For you," she said shyly. Tashi smiled, tucking the flower into his pocket. "Thank you," he said. "It is enough. What did you learn from this story?" Hope to see you in the next video. I will tell the same story but with an even more surprising ending. Please like, share, and subscribe to my channel.